In the cold fjords of Norway, in the village of Stiklestad, a legend begins. Her parents sail with the raiding fleet, leaving young Astrid in the care of her uncle, Erik, the mightiest warrior of the clan. She is only 10 years old with fire in her hair and steel in her eyes. But under Erik's hand, Astrid will rise from child to fighter, defeating boys older, stronger and prouder than her. This is the story of the girl who would not yield. This is Astrid of Stiklestad, written by Brian M. Brumbaugh, narrated by Lilly Smith. Let's begin. The fjord lay quiet in the morning mist. Its waters, black and cold as forged iron, licked the rocky shore where longships once rested. Now the ships were gone, sleek, dragon-prowed vessels gliding across the sea toward distant shores. The village of Stiklestad had watched them vanish days ago, swallowed by the horizon. With them went Astrid's parents, Vidar and Helga. Vidar, her father, was broad-chested and strong, a man whose laughter could fill a hall and whose axe had split the skulls of kings. Helga, her mother, was no less feared. Though she bore the duties of hearth and child, she fought beside Vidar when the sea called. Her bow was said to sing truer than any man's. Together they were a storm on the battlefield, a tale woven already into songs sung by wandering skalds. Now, with the longships away, the village felt different. The men who remained were too old or too young to fight. The women kept the hearths burning, tending goats and fields, but there was an emptiness that weighed on the air. Raids meant survival. Raids meant food, wealth and standing. Without the fleet, Stiklestad felt like a hollow shell waiting for its heart to return. And in that waiting lived Astrid. She was only 10. Hair like violet embers, forever falling loose, no matter how tightly it was braided. Green eyes that missed nothing. Sharp, restless, hungry. She hated the stillness. She hated waiting. While the girls her age were taught to spin wool, weave linen, and keep the fire steady through the long nights, Astrid found herself staring out at the fjord. She dreamed not of sewing needles, but of shields and steel. When the chores became unbearable, she would slip away, scrambling up the rocks above the village until her hands bled, or standing barefoot in the icy stream until her toes turned blue, daring herself not to flinch. Her friends thought her strange, the boys thought her foolish, and the elders whispered that she had inherited too much of Vidar's fire, and not enough of Helga's patience. But she was not alone. For Vidar and Helga had entrusted her to Erik. Erik was Vidar's brother, an uncle, but to Astrid he seemed something more, something larger. He was the greatest warrior Stiklestad had ever produced. Tall as the doorframe of the longhouse, arms thick as oak branches, his beard black and streaked with grey, braided with small bronze rings. His hands were rough stone, his voice thunder when he chose to raise it. And yet, he laughed often, booming and unrestrained, as though every jest was worth savouring. The villagers respected him. They feared him too. Erik had killed men with a single strike of his axe. He bore scars across his chest and arms, each one a mark of survival. He had outlived battles that should have claimed him, and even his enemies spoke of him with reluctant admiration. On the third morning after Vidar and Helga's departure, Astrid followed Erik down to the training ground, a packed circle of dirt beyond the hall where boys gathered to swing wooden swords at straw dummies. The boys noticed her first. "Look," one jeered. "Vidar's little daughter thinks she's a warrior. She'll cry when she breaks a nail," another shouted. "Best keep to weaving, Astrid, or no man will want you." They laughed. And though Astrid's cheeks burned, she refused to look away. Her fists clenched at her sides, nails biting into her palms. Then Erik's shadow fell across them. The laughter died. The boys straightened their stances, eyes fixed on the ground. Erik said nothing. He did not have to. The weight of his silence pressed on them heavier than a shield wall. When he finally turned, it was to Astrid. He rested one massive hand on her small shoulder. "You came to watch?" Astrid met his gaze, chin high though her heart thumped in her chest. "No, I came to learn." Erik studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then his mouth tugged into a half smile, half snarl, as though amused by her defiance. Good, then you'll learn. Not because you are a boy, not because you are a girl, but because you are of my blood. Vidar's blood. My blood. The words settled into her like a hammer striking iron. From that moment her world changed. The other girls carried water, tended goats, and sewed cloth until their fingers ached. Astrid did those things too. Helga had drilled discipline into her daughter before ever leaving, but her heart was no longer in it. Every free moment belonged to the training ground. She watched Erik spar with the boys, saw how he shifted his stance, how he struck only when it mattered, how he made even the strongest stumble with a simple twist of his wrist. When the day's work was done, Erik called her into the circle. No wooden sword yet. First, she learned to fall. Again and again, he swept her legs out from under her. Again and again, she slammed into the dirt, breathless, her elbows scraped raw, her lips split. The world spun and blurred with pain, but Astrid always stood back up. Always. Erik nodded once, approval hidden in the flicker of his eye. Good. A warrior who cannot rise is no warrior at all, the elders muttered disapproval when they saw her bruises. A girl belongs at the loom, one grumbled. She'll never be fit for marriage if she carries scars. But Erik silenced them with a growl. She will be fit for war. That night, Astrid lay awake on her straw bed. Her muscles burned, her lip was swollen, but she felt no shame in her wounds. She traced them with her tongue and thought of them as medals. She thought of Vidar and Helga, sailing across dark waters. She wondered if they would be proud. And she dreamed of Freyja, goddess of battle, beautiful and terrible, standing amidst a field of slain. She dreamed of Valkyries, their armor gleaming, their spears dripping with the blood of kings. She dreamed of herself among them, hair like fire, sword like lightning, her name carried on the wind. By morning she knew. Astrid of Stiklestad was not born for sewing, she was born for steel, and the first step on that path had just begun. The mornings came early in Stiklestad. Frost clung to the grass, and smoke from the hearth fires drifted lazily into the sky. The boys of the village gathered at the training ground, yawning, stamping their feet against the cold wooden swords dangling from their hands. They came because they had to. They came because the clan demanded warriors. Astrid came because she wanted to. Her uncle Erik began her training as he had promised. No sword, no shield, not yet. He started with what mattered most. Feet first, he growled, stomping one massive boot into the dirt. If your feet betray you, the rest will follow. A sword is nothing without balance. A shield is nothing without stance. Even a giant falls if his feet are weak. So Astrid learned to stand. It seemed simple at first, knees bent, weight forward, ready to move. But Erik never let her rest. He shoved her, tripped her, yanked her braids from behind to throw her off balance. Each time she stumbled he barked, again, again, until her legs quivered and her ankles ached. Again until she could no longer feel her toes in the morning frost. She hated it, she loved it. When she faltered, Erik's voice thundered. Do you think Vidar stood like a reed in the wind? Do you think Helga's bow arms shook like a leaf? You are their blood, Astrid. Stand like it. And so she stood. From stance came movement. Erik forced her to run the length of the village hill, until her chest burned and her vision blurred. He had her carry stones up the slope, her small arms straining against their weight. When she dropped one, he made her pick it up and climb again. The villagers watched and shook their heads. Too harsh, they muttered. She's just a child. But Erik ignored them, and Astrid refused to quit. Only after weeks of this did he place a weapon in her hands. A wooden sword cut down from an old spear shaft. Heavy to her small frame, splinters biting her palms. She swung it clumsily at first, the wood slipping in her grip, striking the dirt instead of the target. The boys laughed. "See? She can't even lift it. She'll drop it before she can swing." Astrid's cheeks burned hot. She bit the inside of her lip until she tasted blood. And then she tried again, and again, and again, until her arms trembled like bowstrings pulled too tight. Erik said nothing, only watched, his scarred arms crossed over his chest. When she finally collapsed into the dirt, breath ragged, he pulled her up by the back of her tunic. "You swing like a farmer cutting grass," he said flatly. Astrid's heart sank. Then he leaned close. "But you do not stop. And that is worth more than any blade." The days turned into weeks. Her hands blistered and hardened. Her arms grew wiry and strong. Slowly her swings began to cut the air with speed, her footing no longer faltering as she struck. The other boys noticed. One afternoon during sparring, Erik called Astrid forward. A boy stepped into the circle to meet her, a tall, freckled youth named Knut. He was 3 years older, stronger, with a smug grin plastered across his face. He twirled his wooden sword lazily, as though he faced no challenge at all. The villagers gathered. Whispers passed through the crowd. "She's too small. She'll be broken. Erik has gone mad." Astrid's heart thundered. But when Erik's voice cut through the air, "Fight," she charged. The first clash rattled her bones. Knut's blow struck her so hard she nearly lost her grip. The boys laughed, and he pressed the advantage, raining down strikes that drove her backward into the dirt. Within moments she was flat on her back, staring up at the sky, her chest heaving, her pride bleeding out. The match was over. Knut raised his arms in victory. But Astrid did not cry. She did not flee. She sat up, spitting dirt, and stared at him with a fury that burned brighter than the embers of her hair. Every strike, every stumble replayed in her mind. His stance, his swing, his arrogance. She memorized it all. That night, while others slept, she crept outside with her wooden sword. Under the pale glow of the moon she swung. Again and again. She mimicked Knut's movements, then countered them. She fought shadows until her arms shook and her knees buckled. She trained until dawn, when the mist rose from the fjord once more. The next week Erik called another sparring match. Knut stepped forward again, grinning, sure of victory. Astrid said nothing, she only raised her sword. When Erik barked fight, the boy swung as before, but this time, Astrid was ready. She dodged, quick as a hare. She struck his wrist, forcing him to loosen his grip. He swung again, and she dropped low, sweeping his legs from beneath him just as Erik had done to her countless times. Knut hit the dirt with a heavy thud. The crowd gasped. Astrid pounced, pressing the edge of her wooden sword to his throat. Her green eyes blazed, her hair wild, her chest heaving with victory. Knut's smug grin was gone. He stared up at her, beaten. The boys did not laugh. Not this time. For the first time they looked at Astrid not as a girl, not as a child, but as a fighter. Erik's booming laugh rolled across the training ground. "Good," he bellowed. "Now you begin to understand." And Astrid, standing over her fallen opponent, felt something swell inside her chest. Pride, yes, but more than that. A hunger. A fire. She had tasted victory and it was sweeter than honey. From that day forward, Astrid was no longer just Vidar and Helga's daughter. She was Astrid, fighter of Stiklestad. The weeks after Astrid's first victory tasted like salt on an open wound. For some, anyway. The boys kept their distance, their laughter, once easy, now caught in their throats like fish bones. When they did speak, it was in mutters and sideways glances. The older ones told themselves she'd only beaten Knut because he'd slipped, because the ground was uneven, because the gods had sneezed. Anything but the truth. Astrid had learned them, every lazy step, every heavy swing, and she'd used it. Erik noticed everything. He did not soften, he sharpened. "Strength you can measure," he said, tossing her a bucket filled with river stones. "Will you cannot." Up the hill, Astrid ran until her legs shook and her breath came in ragged gasps. When the stones spilled, she gathered them again. When her palms split, she wrapped them with linen and kept climbing. Erik added drills with the round shield, taller than she was and twice as stubborn, and wrestling in the grass where grip, hips and leverage mattered more than size. He set her to footwork with a line of pebbles traced in the dirt, demanding she dance along them without scattering a single one. When she failed, he erased the line with his heel and made her start again. He taught her to hear distance, to feel intention, to listen for the weight in a breath just before a strike. They trained in wind, in rain, in the pale blue dusk when smoke from the hearths hugged the earth. Some nights he said nothing at all, letting the silence grind her sharper than any word. The village watched. Women paused at the well, the bucket's iron handles creaking in their hands. Old men warmed their backs beside the longhouse wall and narrowed their eyes. A few murmured praise, quietly, like smuggling contraband past the gods. Others scowled, disapproval arranged on their faces as carefully as a feast table. "Erik will ruin the girl," said one elder with a beard like frost. "Scars do not sing well in wedding songs." Erik heard him. Erik did not change. "A keel that fears the sea is a useless plank," he replied, and went back to drilling Astrid until her arms trembled. Not everything was a fight. There were moments that tasted almost like happiness. Astrid found herself walking home after training with a stretch of quiet inside her, the good kind. The kind that comes after you've emptied yourself and discovered you still have more to give. Sometimes she would stop at the smithy, watch sparks jump like captured stars as the blacksmith hammered a blade red to white. Other days she would sit on the flat rock above the fjord, the world below small as a toy village, and whisper to the water, "Come home soon, Vidar. Come home, Helga." The water never answered, but it listened. One afternoon, Erik called a halt. Astrid's tunic clung to her with sweat, her hair was a matted blaze. "You've learned to move," he said. "Now learn to stop. Stop. Control is not a chain," he said. "It is a choice you must be strong enough to make." He set a clay cup on a post and handed her a thrown stick the length of a dagger. "Break the cup." She hurled, the stick thudded into mud. Erik grunted. She adjusted, breathed, watched the wind push a curl of her hair against her cheek, and threw again. The clay exploded into neat ruin. "Good," he said. "Again." He replaced the cup with another. "Now strike the post and spare the cup." She missed. He nodded at the shards. "Power is easy, precision is costly. Pay." She paid, with time, with patience, with a small mountain of broken cups she swept up afterward, while the boys slunk home. By week's end she could split a reed from 10 paces. By 2 weeks she could strike the post and leave the cup humming on its rim. Word of her skill travelled faster than longships. So did the trouble. At dusk one day, as gulls argued above the shore and the tide worried the pebbles, Astrid returned from training to find 2 women standing outside Erik's door. They were wrapped in wool, shoulders stiff, their mouths set into polite blades. "A word, Erik," the elder of the 2 said, "for the good of the village." He let them speak. They talked of proper roles, of balance, of how the gods ordered the world. They talked of the need for strong sons and dutiful daughters, of dowries and alliances, of the weight of custom upon which the village stood. Erik listened like a cliff listens to waves. When they were finished he simply said, "The gods made storms and the boats to ride them." Astrid stood just inside the doorway, small as a breath, burning and ashamed for reasons she could not name. When the women left, she stared at her uncle. He looked back, slow and steady. "You are not a problem," he said. "You are a promise. The world is loud when promises wake up." That night Astrid slept badly, her dreams snagged on words like hooks. She woke before dawn and crept to the training circle. The mist lay low, the world ghost pale. She set 3 cups on 3 posts and practiced until the fog cleared, and the dew baked off the grass, and the world remembered its color. When Erik arrived, He found all 3 cups standing, the posts, nicked neat as runes. He said nothing. He did not need to. He simply clapped once, a sound like a tree breaking, and pointed to the hills. They ran. Feast came early that season, an offering to the gods, a prayer for safe seas and swift returns. The longhouse swelled with voices, smoke wound up into the rafters to sleep, meat crackled on spits, children darted like sparrows between legs, dogs practiced the ancient art of looking starving. The skald tuned his harp and tested a string with a thumb rough as bark. Astrid sat near the fire with a trencher of roasted fish and barley. Erik sat to her right, spine straight, eyes soft. When laughter rolled through the hall, he joined it. When tension tightened like a rope, he watched the knot and waited. The boys clustered nearby, stake-lean and restless, their faces red with heat and ale stolen in sips. Knut tried not to look at Astrid. He failed. It did not take long. A lad named Torvald, thick-necked, bright with one too many gulps, lifted his wooden cup and called out, "A toast to Astrid, who fights like a fox." Laughter. Torvald flushed, pleased with himself. His brother Ivar grinned like a blade. "A fox is small. I say she fights like a gnat." The table snickered. Torvald, eager to ride the wave he'd made, thumped his cup. "Better yet, let's see the gnat sting." He stood, wobbled and pointed across the fire. "Astrid of Stiklestad," he proclaimed, "will you dance with us, a friendly bout, 2 brothers, together?" A murmur rippled outward, thin and electric. The old men leaned forward, the women stilled. The skald's fingers froze above the strings. Astrid set down her trencher. She felt the flutter in her chest, a bird bouncing against bone. She let it flutter. She let it spend itself. Then she stood. "If you wish," she said. Ivar's grin sharpened. Torvald chuckled low, warning and promise. Erik neither nodded nor frowned. He merely slid a look to the door and rose, moving toward the night air. The hall spilled after them, people pouring out in a stream, their breath smoky in the cold. They formed a ring in the torchlit yard. The posts and straw dummies stood at the circle's edge like they had come to watch the show. The fjord glimmered with a flat, dark light, patient as always. Ivar and Torvald stepped into the circle together, 2 years between them, shared eyes and shared arrogance. Torvald held a round shield and a wooden sword. Ivar chose 2 short sticks cut from an ash branch, one for striking, one for trapping. Astrid rolled her shoulders and felt the mile of running still sleeping there. She could have asked for a shield, she did not. She carried her wooden sword and nothing else. Erik's voice slid between them. "No blood," he said. "A touch to the heart or throat ends the bout. If a brother interferes when he should not, the gods will see. And so will I." He looked at Torvald and Ivar until they remembered their fear. Then he looked at Astrid and saw only her. Begin. They came at her like a door closing. Torvald drove straight, shield high, sword lifted for the kind of overhead blow that wins tavern stories but loses wars. Ivar split right, sliding like a thought around her guard. Astrid stepped left and back, feeling the ground with her heels, letting the 2 lines miss their meeting point. Torvald's sword hammered air. Ivar's stick hissed past her cheek, close enough to comb a strand of hair. She did not strike, not yet. She let them show her what they believed about her. They circled, grinning. Torvald feinted left. Ivar jabbed light and fast. Astrid gave them a target and snatched it away, moving just beyond the reach of a wrist, a shoulder, a breath. The crowd murmured, sound rising and falling like surf. "Fight, girl," Ivar taunted. "Or will you run us to death?" Astrid smiled without teeth. "If that will teach you to think." Ivar flushed. He rushed. Torvald thundered in with him, shield forward like a battering ram. Astrid dropped low and pivoted hard off her right foot, the way Erik had taught her in drills so boring they became religion. The brothers crashed past where she had been, and nearly collided shoulder to shoulder. A ripple of laughter tore free from the ring. Pride makes hands clumsy. Their hands grew clumsy. Astrid moved. She slashed at the top rim of Torvald's shield, not to break it but to lift it, and as it rose, she stamped on the bottom edge, pinning it to his own thigh. The shield trapped him open for a breath, and in that breath, she drove the pad of her practice blade to the center of his chest. Tap, true and final. Heart, she said softly. The circle shouted. Torvald gulped air, confusion and anger wrestling in his eyes. He stumbled back, freed his foot, and looked to his brother. Ivar's jaw set hard enough to spool stone. Again Ivar snapped. Erik lifted a palm. Brothers may fight in turn, he said, but a touch is a touch. Torvald shoved his shield at Ivar anyway, fury blurting past his ears. Then take her head! Ivar lunged. Astrid saw the hands, not the weapons. The hands said impatience, the shoulders said haste. She cut once, shallow to draw his guard, a tap to the wrist, and turned with his momentum, letting him chase space that her body had abandoned. The short stick glanced off her shoulder. The second stick, meant to trap, caught nothing. He overcommitted. She took what he offered. Her wooden blade flicked, a whisper against his throat. Not cruel. Precise. Throat, she said. Silence held the ring in its palm for a breath, maybe two, then shattered like the clay cups on the posts. Voices tumbled over one another. Astonishment, outrage, laughter that wasn't laughter at all but shock renting its clothes. Somewhere a dog barked at the moon for permission to join the chaos. Torvald surged, temper drowning agreed rules. Once more! Erik's hand closed around Torvald's shoulder. A boulder learned to move. You promised no blood, he said. Do not make me keep your promise for you. Torvald's mouth worked. His eyes slid to Ivar, who stood palm pressed to his own throat as if uncertain it was still there. Ivar nodded very slowly. Torvald's rage guttered like a torch in rain. Astrid stepped back from the circle, chest rising and falling, the night air cutting cool and clean into the heat of her lungs. She expected triumph to erupt inside her, loud and bright. Something else arrived instead, something quieter, the satisfaction of a lesson learned correctly. A note hit true. The elders huddled near the edge of the crowd, their faces the color of unbaked dough. One of them, the frost-bearded man, shook his head as if trying to rattle loose the world he preferred. Showmanship, he muttered. Tricks? Erik turned his head, the smallest motion like a mountain changing its mind, and the man discovered some urgent interest in his own shoes. Not everyone scowled. A knot of younger girls clung to each other's sleeves, eyes moon-wide, whispering Astrid's name as if it might bite or bless. A few of the boys wore expressions more complicated than envy. Frustration warred with respect, and respect was winning a slow, honest fight. The skald, who understood how stories feed on breath, stepped forward and plucked a bright, simple tune. He did not shape words yet. He only made space for them to be born. Torches hissed. The fjord pulled the night tight across its shoulders. When Erik finally spoke, his voice carried as if the air had been saving room for it. You've learned to fight people, he said to Astrid. Now learn to fight yourself. She frowned. Myself? Your fear, he said. Your pride. Both are liars with good singing voices. A ghost of a smile found him. And you like music. Astrid huffed, half laugh, half protest, and rolled a sore shoulder. Somewhere in her chest the fluttering bird took wing again, not in panic now but in pure movement. She was not an answer. She was a becoming. That night, the feast swelled and faded, until the coals sank into their own red thinking. Astrid sat with her back against a post just outside the longhouse, the wood warm where the fire had kissed it. Erik lowered himself beside her, every joint a creak of old oak. You were not kind, he said. She stared at her scraped knuckles. They were not kind. No, he agreed. They were not. Is that the measure? She weighed that, the way she weighed an opponent, hands, eyes, breath. No, she said at last. But it is tempting, He reached into his cloak and produced a strip of dried meat, handed it to her, took one for himself. They chewed in peace. The stars climbed from their hiding places. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. Your father broke a man's arm once in a wrestling pit, he said. The man had insulted your mother. Vidar could have let him yield. Pride is a fast horse, it carried him too far. Astrid waited. Afterward Erik said, your mother bound the man's arm herself. Vidar did not speak for 2 days. When he did, he said, I will not be a storm that destroys my own roof. Then he kissed Helga as if she were the hinge on which the world turns. The memory softened him further, made him, for a breath, less mountain and more man. Astrid imagined it, the tenderness, the regret, the choice. And my mother? She has never loved small, Erik said. She forgives in the same size she fights. Astrid tucked that away like a coin. The feast ended. The village went to its various dreams. Erik stood with a grunt and offered her a hand up. She took it. He did not let go immediately. Tomorrow, he said, we wrestle. She wrinkled her nose. Again? Again, he said, deadpan, until you can toss me into the fjord. She snorted. I'm small, not a miracle. Small is a miracle, he said, and the line pleased him so much he pretended it had always existed. They slept. Dawn hauled itself over the ridge and dragged the light with it. Astrid woke with her muscles singing a choral complaint. She sang back, training bit harder after the feast. Erik made her practice against 2 at once, boys who had not challenged her in public, but who in private swung like the world would end if they did not land a blow. She learned to keep one body between herself and the other, to make enemies trip over each other's certainties. He taught her to fight in mud, where feet lie as often as tongues, and on slick rock by the shore, where balance is a religion with strict tithes. He had her drive stakes and lash rope between them, then spar inside the web until she could move without tangling once. He put a hood over her eyes and made her listen. Where am I? He asked, circling, his boots scuffing, his breath measured. She reached for sound, for the draft on her skin when something big displaces air, for the smell of wool and iron and the clove smoke he favored. She missed. He cuffed her gently, enough to teach but not to shame. The next time she found him. Her wooden blade kissed his sleeve, a promise for later. And then came the day she had been courting since she first stepped into the circle. Erik called for the final lesson of the season before winter sharpened everything for them. You will try me, he said. The boys stopped pretending not to eavesdrop. The women kept working with hands that slowed but did not stop. Even the ravens in the birch watched, heads cocked as though gossip had finally achieved quality. Astrid swallowed. Try to win. Try to know, he said. Winning is noise. Knowing is music. They faced each other in the ring as the pale sun tugged a reluctant warmth over the yard. Erik, bareheaded, hair braided back, axe nowhere in sight, only the open hands of a fighter who needs nothing he cannot carry in his body. Astrid lifted her wooden sword and felt, absurdly, alone and held at the same time. He nodded. She moved. She did not rush. She knew better. She circled, testing his feet, the way a stream tests a rock, and maps the easiest path around it. She feinted. He did not blink. She cut. He caught the cut on the flat of his forearm and slid inside it, his hand like a tide around her wrist. She let the sword go rather than have her shoulder wrenched, and in the letting go she found a new thing, her free hand, her hip, her weight. They grappled. He taught her with his body, the way a teacher writes on a slate. This is how you break a line. This is how you borrow a man's gravity and make him pay interest. This is how you lose with grace so that you can win with it later. He threw her. The ground took her back like an old friend with a sense of humor. She rolled, came up, tried something sly and ridiculous, ducked between his legs, grabbed his knee, twisted. For one shimmering heartbeat, the unthinkable happened. Erik's balance faltered. The ring gasped. He laughed, delighted at his own surprise, and let himself go with it, rolling as if she had planned it that way all along. He came up behind her and tapped her shoulder. "Throat," he said gently. They reset. Again. Each exchange taught her something. Her forearms bruised purple, her breath learned math. The world narrowed to a field of applied truths, angles, levers, the human urge to keep its head, the human tendency to forget its feet. At last, sweat guttering her temples, hair half torn from its braids, Astrid pressed her palms to her knees and drew a long, slow breath. Erik stood easy and whole, as if the bout had been a pleasant walk. He lifted a hand, not in victory but in verdict. Enough, she straightened. The ring held still. Even the birch leaves paused, obliging drama. "You are no longer practicing," he said, voice level as a table. "You are fighting." He stepped closer, and in the torch-scarred wood of the posts, in the scuffed dirt, in the faces at the rim of the circle, something shifted, small as a click, large as a door opening. "You are a fighter, Astrid." He did not add girl or child or almost. He did not need to. The words lit a lantern inside her. Not a bonfire, not a wild spark that burns and leaves ash. A steady, carried flame. From across the yard came the sound of hooves and the jingle of harness. Heads turned. A rider canters in from the ridge path, horse hide dark with sweat, the man's cloak choked with road dust. He swung down stiffly and strode toward the ring, pulling off his glove as if the message in his fist might overheat if he waited. "A word for Erik, brother of Vidar," he called. Silence caught the village by the collar. Erik stepped forward, drying his hands on his tunic. The rider pressed a strip of stained parchment into his palm. Erik read. The lines around his eyes deepened. Astrid's body knew before her mind arranged the words. The world tilted. The fjord seemed to climb a fraction up its own banks. "Say it," she whispered. Erik looked at her. Not at the village, not at the elder men, not at the skald, not at the haltered mules stamping at flies. At her. "Word from the fleet," he said. "Vidar lives. Helga lives." A sound escaped her she had not intended to share. Not a sob, something lighter, fiercer, a laugh that forgot how to use its legs. Her knees went loose and then remembered their duty. Erik's hand was already there, bracing her elbow, anchoring. He continued, something in him bracing too. "Storms. A fight with men who do not fear the sea enough. Delay in the return." He folded the parchment, careful as a prayer. "They come." Astrid breathed like a woman who has just remembered air. Around them the village found motion and noise again. Someone clapped Erik's shoulder, someone else blessed the gods aloud. The skald's fingers slid into a melody that had been waiting politely nearby. The children resumed their game, which was both older and newer than it had been 5 heartbeats earlier. Erik's eyes cleared. He looked back to the ring, to the posts, to the scuffs her heels had carved into the earth. "Tomorrow," he said, voice finding its everyday again. "You rest?" Astrid blinked. "Rest?" He nodded, grave. A fighter must learn to be still without dying of it. She wrinkled her nose. "I prefer dying. Many do," he said dryly. "It is easier than patience." She laughed helplessly, and something like the world laughed with her. That night she lay on her back and watched the rafters stitch their dark pattern overhead. The house creaked softly, an old ship at safe harbor. Through the open door she could see a square of sky, blue leaking into black, stars pricking through like runes written by a hand too large to be human. She did not dream of victory or humiliation, of Ivar's throat or Torvald's chest, of clay cups breaking or not breaking. She dreamed of the moment Erik had said it plain. "You are a fighter." The words circled her like geese before winter, then settled, folded their wings, breathed. Morning would come. She would rest, she would try, and after that there would be more drills, more cups, more stones up the hill. There would be pride like a fast horse, and the work of learning to ride it without being carried away. There would be a returning fleet, and the taste of stories becoming facts. There would be winter, which audits every lie. But now there was the steady lantern fire inside her, and the knowledge that it burned not in defiance of her village but as part of it. She was not outside the story, she was the next verse. Far off the fjord held its usual counsel. It did not tell her what the sea might bring back besides her parents. It did not promise that storms only visited ships. It did not say that strength always chooses you because you choose it. It said nothing at all. It gleamed. Astrid smiled into the dark. "Let it come," she whispered. "All of it." The night tucked itself close, and Stiklestad slept. The morning after the feast broke cold and clear. Frost rimed the eaves of the houses, and smoke lifted from every hearth like prayer. Stiklestad stirred slow, the memory of ale and laughter still thick in its walls. But Astrid's blood hummed with something sharper than any drink. The ring of wood against wood, the gasps of the crowd, the moment when her wooden blade kissed Ivar's throat, when silence had bent its knee to her. She was no longer invisible, and Erik knew it was time. That day he set no cups on posts, no stones on hills, no rope webs to tangle her feet. He walked to the training circle with the surety of a man stepping into ritual. Astrid followed, her small frame straight as a spear. The village noticed, and one by one they drifted to the circle's edge. The boys, the women, the elders with their heavy brows, the skald with his harp slung over his back. Erik stopped in the center. He did not carry his axe. His hands were empty, scarred and certain. "Astrid of Stiklestad," he said, his voice carrying across the circle. "Today you face me." A ripple ran through the crowd, soft and sharp as wind through barley. Astrid's heart slammed once against her ribs, then steadied. She had dreamed of this and dreaded it. To fight Erik was not to fight boys. It was to fight the mountain itself. But when she looked at him, she did not see impossibility. She saw her uncle, her teacher, her path. She lifted her wooden sword. "I am ready." The crowd hushed. Erik nodded once. "Begin." He came at her not like a storm but like the sea, relentless, measured, eternal. His first strike was not wild but perfect, a test of her stance. She parried, the wood shuddering in her hands nearly torn away. Her arms screamed but held. She stepped back, light on her feet, circling. He pressed again. She blocked, dodged, ducked low, her braid flying loose. The crowd murmured. Astrid struck back, quick as a falcon. Erik caught the blow on his forearm and slid past her guard, tapping her shoulder with the flat of his hand. "Dead," he said, then stepped back. Astrid's jaw clenched. She raised her sword again, and they fought. Again. Erik struck with patient ferocity, every blow a lesson, every fall a chance. Astrid hit the dirt once, twice, 5 times. Each time she rolled back to her feet, spit blood, and grinned like a wolf cub daring the world to bite harder. At last she found an opening. He overextended slightly, reaching to test her reflexes. She ducked under, drove forward, and slammed her small shoulder into his ribs with all the weight of her defiance. For a heartbeat the mountain shifted. He stumbled half a step. The crowd gasped. Astrid darted in and pressed the edge of her wooden sword to his side. "Heart," she breathed. Erik laughed, deep, booming, unshaken. "Good," he roared. Then with a twist like a landslide, he swept her feet and sent her sprawling. He loomed above her, tapped her chest with 2 fingers and said gently, "Dead again." Silence. Then Erik reached down, hauled her upright as if she weighed nothing, and raised her arm high. "She is no longer a child," he bellowed. "She is a fighter of Stiklestad." The crowd erupted, cheers, clapping, even laughter. Some still shook their heads, but the sound was drowned by the younger voices, by the women smiling into their sleeves, by the boys who now watched Astrid with wary respect. The skald plucked a sharp, triumphant note on his harp, and the tune caught like flame. Astrid stood panting, bruised, filthy, but blazing inside. For the first time she felt not just Vidar's daughter, not just Helga's child, not just Erik's ward, but herself. A fighter. A flame no one could put out. That evening, as the village settled, Astrid climbed the ridge above Stiklestad. The fjord lay below, vast and dark, its waters waiting for sails. The sun dipped low, painting the world in blood and gold. Erik's voice drifted behind her, steady as ever. "You will go farther than any of them, little flame." Astrid looked at the horizon, her green eyes fierce, her hair a torch against the dusk. She did not answer. She only gripped her wooden sword and held it high, as if saluting the sea, the sky, and the gods themselves. The wind caught her hair. The world seemed to pause. And so began the legend of Astrid of Stiklestad, the child who fought like a warrior, and the warrior who one day would fight like a legend. If you enjoyed Astrid's story, don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode of her journey. Thank you, Brian M. Brumbaugh.